Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
This is the Bloomberg Daybreak here at Podcast. Good morning. It's Thursday, the 18th of September. I'm Caroline Hepker in London.
And I'm Stephen Carroll in Brussels. Coming up today, Jerome Powell rallies Federal Reserve rate setters to back a 25 basis point cut as Trump's appointee Myron opts for 50.
The US president joins the king and tech royalty for a glittering state banquet at Windsor Castle.
Plus, pulling the plug, Disney takes Jimmy Kimmel's talk show off air over remarks he made about Charlie Kirk's killing.
Let's start with a roundup of our top stories.
The Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell has rallied his committee of policymakers to back the central bank's first interest rate cut of the year. The quarter-point reduction came after a significant slowdown in job growth and an unprecedented push by the White House for much lower rates. But with the effects of tariffs on inflation still uncertain, Powell made clear that Fed officials will face difficult trade-offs in the coming months as they consider whether to keep cutting.
You could think of this in a way as a risk management cut, because if you look at the SEP, actually the projections for growth this year and next actually ticked up just a little bit, and inflation and unemployment didn't really move much. So what's different now? What's different now is that you see a very different picture of the risks to the labor market.
The decision to cut rates was nearly unanimous, with the lone dissent coming from Fed Governor Stephen Myron, a close ally of Donald Trump, who favoured a larger reduction. Fed Governors Christopher Waller and Michelle Bowman, who dissented in July in favour of a rate cut, supported this move.
Well, the Bank of England is expected to rein in its quantitative tightening programme amid concerns that its gilt sales are worsening volatility in the bond market. Economists and investors are expecting the bank's Monetary Policy Committee to slow the speed at which it reduces its holdings of government bonds to £70 billion a year, down from £100 billion. Officials may also decide to sell fewer long-dated gilts. The bank will announce the changes alongside its interest rate decision today, where it's widely expected to hold rates at 4% amid high inflation of 3.8% in August.
Britain's King Charles praised US President Donald Trump's efforts to support Ukraine against tyranny after a day of lavish celebrations in honour of the special relationship. The UK monarch underlined the strength of the ties between the two countries in his speech at the state banquet.
In 2 world wars, we fought together to defeat the forces of tyranny. Today, as tyranny once again threatens Europe, we and our allies stand together in support of Ukraine to deter aggression and secure peace.
King Charles's comments on Ukraine came after a day of royal spectacle. The two heads of state inspected troops, rode in a horse-drawn carriage, and laid a wreath for the late Queen Elizabeth. The ceremony seems to have impressed the US president.
This is truly one of the highest honours of my life. Such respect for you and such respect for your country. For many decades, His Majesty the King has epitomised the fortitude, nobility, and the spirit of the British monarchy and the British people.
Donald Trump speaking at the state banquet in Windsor Castle. In diplomatic talks later today, the UK's Prime Minister Keir Starmer hopes to press Trump on trade terms and the war in Ukraine, although major breakthroughs aren't expected. The Prime Minister will do so without his top ambassador, who he fired last week for his ties to the late Jeffrey Epstein. The visit is also a chance for the two governments to sign investment deals, with the British government announcing US companies were planning £150 billion in investments to coincide with the occasion.
Now, Disney is taking Jimmy Kimmel's talk show off the air indefinitely amid a backlash to remarks that he made about the killing of Republican activist Charlie Kirk. The comments, which focused on the response of the Trump-supporting MAGA movement to Kirk's killing, angered many right-wing commentators and brought criticism from members of the Trump administration. Following that, the head of the US broadcast regulator told podcast host Benny Johnson there was a strong case to punish Kimmel and Disney.
From the moment that I have become chairman of the FCC, I want to reinvigorate the public interest. And what people don't understand is that the broadcasters, and you've gotten this right, are entirely different than people that use other forms of communication. They have a license granted by us at the FCC, and that comes with it an obligation to operate in the public interest.
That was FCC Chair Brendan Carr speaking on The Benny Show. Disney's ABC network took Kimmel's show off air after Nexstar Media, which owns dozens of US TV affiliates, said that it would pull the programme indefinitely from its stations over the remarks, which it said were offensive and insensitive. In a statement, the Writers Guild of America criticised the move, saying, quote, "If free speech applied only to ideas we like, we needn't have bothered to write it into the Constitution."
European Union countries have agreed to open talks with the UK and Canada on access to its new €150 billion defence fund. Bloomberg's Michal Kubala has more.
The Security Action for Europe programme, known as SAFE, aims to boost investment in the EU defence industry. Brussels will now begin negotiations to allow British and Canadian firms to take part in joint weapons projects funded by the plan. Other countries, including Albania, Turkey and South Korea, have also asked to join. SAFE is designed to accelerate production of critical military equipment, such as drones or cyber defence. 19 EU countries have already applied for loans under the programme. In Brussels, Michal Kubala, Bloomberg Radio.
French unions will lead widespread anti-austerity protests today. That's as newly elected Prime Minister Sébastien Lecornu searches for political allies to help draw up a budget. All major labour organisations have instructed members to demonstrate against spending cuts proposed in July that they say amount to unprecedented brutality. Cyril Chabagnier, president of the French Confederation of Christian Workers, says the protests are about sparking change.
We are protesting primarily against the budget. That means we really want to create pressure so that the budget presented by François Bayrou, which could be reprised by Mr. Lecornu, will be profoundly modified. So it's that is important, to place pressure so that we are understood.
French trade unionist Cyril Chabagnier speaking there. Lecornu is yet to indicate, though, which fiscal concessions he's willing to make to the budget initially proposed by previous Prime Minister François Bayrou, who was forced to resign after losing a confidence vote earlier this month.
Meta wants to turn its smart glasses into a must-have product with the new model boasting inbuilt screens. The social media giant is rebranding the product as AI glasses with a price tag of $799. Meta CEO Mark Zuckerberg says he's bringing superintelligence to consumer electronics.
This is going to be the most important technology in our lifetimes. AI should serve people, not just be something that sits in a data center automating large parts of society. So we design our glasses to be able to empower people with new capabilities as soon as they become possible.
Zuckerberg was speaking at Meta's annual event to showcase new technology. The company's hoping the new display glasses will be a stepping stone to full augmented reality glasses.
OK, those are a few of our top stories for you this morning. So in terms of the markets, US stock futures are up after the Fed rate cut yesterday. Nasdaq futures in particular up by 0.7%. And you did have global stocks rally on the back of that cut with more penciled in. Treasuries this morning rallying a tad, 4.06 for 10-year yields down 2 basis points. Bank of England not expected to cut rates. It's all about quantitative tightening and what they're doing in terms of their gilt sales, reducing those is the expectation. European stock futures are also up this morning, 0.4%. Oil holding on to declines that we saw yesterday. Brent crude futures down another 0.3% this morning, weighing that rate cut and increased US fuel inventories. Gold is also down, though, 0.2 this morning. Those are the markets.
In a moment, more on the Fed and Bank of England decisions, plus the nightmare at Nestlé, the challenges facing the new top team at the world's biggest food company. But I just want to take a moment to talk a little bit about the banquet at Windsor Castle. Needless to say, a pretty opulent affair in St. George's Hall, 160 guests, and I note more than 1,400 pieces of cutlery, which I'm very glad that I was not involved in having to wash or polish.
Absolutely. But I think the key takeaway, I watched it last night, which is why I'm a little bleary-eyed this morning. President Trump was full of praise and admiration, not just for the King, but also for the UK, for the special relationship. He called it more than that. We're like two notes in one chord or two verses of the same poem. Stephen, I don't think that the UK could have had a better speech in diplomatic terms from the US leader. And certainly if you listened with a Conservative or Reform UK ear, So Britain has used its royal diplomacy and all of that pomp to really create a genuinely warm feeling. Does that soft power now bring economic benefits when you get to the nitty-gritty of the politics today? Huge sums in terms of tech investment. Does that actually deliver for jobs and growth in the UK? Did the UK is it getting a good deal out of these tech sums?
I mean, on a much lighter note, I salute your Britishness that you stayed up late and sacrificed your sleep to watch the state banquet.
I mean, it is a historic event.
It's a big moment. I mean, to be honest, I was struck looking at it is that despite the fact that this was, the top tier list of guests, all these CEOs, Stephen Schwarzman from Blackstone and all the tech CEOs we've talked about being there, they couldn't see each other. The table dressings are so high that you would not have been able to look at or speak to the person sitting opposite you, because it looked nearly the same height as the table itself, with the piles of lamps and candles.
Again, I watched it too closely because apparently it was meant to look like a dragon. The table decorations, yes, they were. Everything was themed. Absolutely everything was meant to be a pointer to heritage, etc.
And even though, of course, Donald Trump does not drink alcohol, they did have a special 1945 vintage port for the after dinner drinks, which was meant to be a nod to him being the 45th president of the United States. As you say, every detail paid attention to. The focus, of course, shifting today to the more serious conversations, as there's that meeting coming up with Keir Starmer later on, and a press conference as well. So plenty more to come on Donald Trump's state visit to the UK.
Now, let's bring you some details of the Federal Reserve decision yesterday, with the US Central Bank signalling more cuts are to come this year. This as we look ahead to today's Bank of England decision, where rates are expected to stay on hold at 4%. Our markets reporter Valerie Teitel joins us now for more.
Good morning.
Good morning, Val. The Fed cut by a quarter point as markets expected. What did Powell tell us about what happens next?
Look, he was not as strong in his language about the pace of rate cuts, or even the door for October being wide open for yet another rate cut. And that really kind of disappointed the equity market and the Treasury market at the end of the session. So he wasn't super clear. And he also wasn't super clear that when it comes to their dual mandate, that the risks to the labor market now completely outweigh the risks to inflation. When he was talking about the dual mandate, he has said that the downside risks to unemployment have risen, but the two mandates are moving more into an equal framework. So there wasn't any big flashing sign out there that for him, the labor market needed a quick adjustment in policy rates. And actually, Caroline, when he was asked about whether they discussed 50 basis points and whether what he felt about a 50 basis point cut, he said that it had little support within the committee at all today for a 50 basis point rate reduction, and said that you tend to do those things when you feel that policy is out of place and you need to move quickly. And that is not at all how I feel. So to me and to the markets, that meant that this argument that Christopher Waller has put forward, that the labor market is flashing red and needs urgent rate cuts, has just not necessarily convinced the rest of the members yet. And maybe even perhaps even Christopher Waller himself is less convinced about that framework, because he did not dissent at this meeting. There was only one dissent, Caroline. It came from the new member, Stephen Myron, who voted for a 50 basis point rate reduction. But Christopher Waller and Bowman, who dissented in the previous decision, did not dissent this time for a larger than expected rate cut. They did vote for a 25 basis point rate reduction. So that to me is kind of the more dovish, the leaders of the dovish camp previously, that being Christopher Waller, might be less convinced in their case, perhaps, after that really hot retail sales figure we got 2 days ago.
Valerie, I mean, a lot of the focus around this meeting has been on the presence of Stephen Myron on that policy-making committee. And as you say, he was the dissenter. He voted for 50 basis points as well. He'd come from his job in the White House beforehand. And with all of the questions around Fed independence that were in the background for this decision as well, I mean, how significant is it that we only had one dissent, I suppose? And what does it mean for those questions around the independence of the Fed?
Well, Myron not only dissented, but in his in that dot plot, he not only wanted a 50 basis point rate reduction in yesterday's meeting, he wanted a 50 basis point in October and a 50 basis point in December. So he wants 150 basis points of rate reduction before year end. So in that kind of way, there was a pretty strong standout on the governor board from Stephen Myron. It just does not seem that he has convinced any other members around him that the labor market is in a case where it needs those rapid cuts. But when it comes to questions about independence, Powell was asked about that. He was even asked about Lisa Cook's court case that's headed to the Supreme Court. He didn't comment on any of that and push back, saying that this decision was made independent of politics and looking at the data. The data has clearly shown that labor market risks have risen, and that in some way warrants a move towards neutral and a less restrictive policy stance.
Yeah, and Powell talking about meeting by meeting, that this situation will continue, as they go forward. In terms of the Bank of England today, no change to interest rates expected, but the focus is on gilt sales. What are the markets going to be watching about this?
So the number the market is projecting, at least for this update when it comes to their quantitative tightening program, is for it to be reduced from 100 billion to around 70 billion annual pace a year. That's probably going to be the focus of the decision today. We know that these gilt sales in some way have been complicating the liquidity in the back end of the gilt market, that it has risen to multi-decade highs in the last month alone. However, when it comes to the rate decision and the policy moving forward, there really wasn't any surprises in the labor market data or the inflation data we've gotten this week. So the market in some ways expecting the Bank of England to not necessarily guide for any further rate reductions into the end of the year. The market actually isn't really penciling in one for a few months' time, headed well into 2026. So it's really going to be more about the quantitative tightening program and maybe what that says about their confidence in the long end of the gilt market.
Okay, Valerie Teitel, our markets reporter, thank you very much. Stay with us. More from Bloomberg Daybreak Europe coming up after this.
Now, the world's biggest food company, Nestlé, has been shaken by scandal and management upheaval. After years of strategic drift and rising debt, investors are pressing the incoming CEO, Philippe Navratil, to restore stability. Bloomberg's Dasha Afanasieva has been writing about the challenges that he faces, and she joins us now. Good morning, Dasha. So Navratil was brought in as CEO to replace Laurent Frex, who was fired after an undisclosed romantic relationship. We learned this week that the company's own chairman will now retire early and will be replaced by the former Zara boss, Pablo Isla, from next month. So it's a new top team. What's their most important job now?
It's all change at Nestlé. As you said in your intro, Nestlé since 22 has kind of been adrift. I'm talking about falling volumes, low sales, high costs. And the task for the new management team is really to reignite growth. And the task was the same really just over a year ago when the previous CEO got appointed. And he had his plan in place, but it hasn't really fully taken hold.
Dasha, what did the scandal around Laurent Frex and his relationship expose about the company?
It exposed very poor corporate governance and a weak board because these things kind of happened under their watch, maybe a too strong a chairman. And I think it's raised, for a lot of investors, it's raised questions over whether that also explains these unforced errors that we've had in recent years. Things like the problems with the vitamins and minerals business, things like contamination issues in French mineral water, and the overall sort of sluggish growth and, poor pricing, that kind of thing.
So CEO Philippe Navratil spoke to staff yesterday. What did he say?
He praised the company's global reach and its brands, but he said, I'm going to come back later with a plan to return us to growth or strong growth. So it's a sort of watch this space kind of meeting that finished half an hour early.
Which was of note in that sort of conversation as well. Aside from the boardroom turmoil at Nestlé, talk to us about some of the other challenges the company is facing. Of course, I'm thinking a Swiss company, tariffs clearly going to be an issue for them.
So almost all of Nestlé's supply chain is quite localized. The major exception would be Nespresso, which is all produced in Switzerland, and America's a major market for that, although they don't actually fully break it out. Overall, it's like a 6 billion Swiss franc business. I think that more broadly, but like every company, obviously they have raw materials coming from various countries, so they still have to import things, but at least the final products are typically made locally, certainly in America. So that's a source of relief. But of course, tariffs complicate the picture for all global companies.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe, your morning brief on the stories making news from London to Wall Street and beyond.
Look for us on your podcast feed every morning on Apple, Spotify and anywhere else you get your podcasts.
You can also listen live each morning on London DAB Radio, the Bloomberg Business app and Bloomberg.com.
Our flagship New York station is also available on your Amazon Alexa devices. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130. I'm Caroline Hepker.
And I'm Stephen Carroll. Join us again tomorrow morning for all the news you need to start your day, right here on Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.